The auction yard was wide and dusty, surrounded by old wooden fences and broken carts. People gathered from nearby towns and farms. Some came to buy tools, some came to watch, and some came only to talk. The sun was high, and the air felt heavy. Voices mixed together, creating noise that never seemed to stop. At the center of the yard stood a raised platform. A land officer stood there with papers in his hand. He spoke loudly, calling out items and prices. Most people listened with interest, but one figure stood apart from the rest. Her name was Mira. Mira was a native woman, grown and strong, with calm eyes and straight posture. She wore simple clothes, worn by work and travel. Her hands were tied loosely, not because she was weak, but because the rules of the land were unfair. Her family had been forced into a debt they did not understand. Because of that debt, her labor contract had been brought to the auction. Myra did not cry, she did not beg. She stood tall and watched the crowd carefully. She saw faces filled with curiosity, some with pity, and some with careless smiles. None of them knew her story, and none of them had asked. The land officer cleared his throat and raised his voice. He spoke about the contract as if it were a simple thing. He said it was legal and approved. He spoke fast so no one could question him. Bidding began, but no one raised a hand. The price was small, but people hesitated. Some did not care. Some felt uneasy. The silence stretched. The officer laughed and shook his head. He lowered the price again and again. Finally, he said the lowest amount possible, $2. A few people laughed. Some turned away. Mira felt anger rise in her chest, but her face stayed calm. She had already decided that no matter who paid, she would not bow her head. At the edge of the crowd stood a cowboy named Tom. Tom was quiet and observant. His clothes were dusty, his boots worn from long trails. He had spent many years riding across open land, working for little pay and sleeping under the sky. He did not like towns or crowds, but he had come to sell supplies and leave quickly. When he heard the final price, he looked up sharply. He saw Mira standing there, silent and proud. Something in her expression stopped him. She did not look broken, she looked unyielding. Tom stepped forward slowly. People noticed him only when he reached the platform. He took 2 coins from his pocket and placed them on the table. "I will pay," he said. The yard fell silent. The officer blinked in surprise, then smiled. He pushed the paper toward Tom and reached for the coins. The officer did not ask questions. He never did. Mira turned her head and looked directly at Tom. Her eyes burned with anger, not fear. "You will regret this," she said clearly. "I will not obey." Her voice carried across the yard. Some people shifted uncomfortably. Others whispered. The officer frowned but said nothing. Tom met her gaze. He did not look proud or pleased. He only nodded once. "I am not asking for obedience," he said quietly. He took a small knife from his belt and cut the rope around her wrists. The fibers fell to the ground. Mira flexed her hands slowly, surprised by the act. The officer protested, but Tom ignored him. He folded the paper without reading it and turned away from the platform. "Come," he said to Mira. "We are leaving." Mira hesitated. The law forced her to follow, but her spirit resisted. Still, she walked beside him, her steps firm. The crowd parted as they passed. No one stopped them. They left the yard and moved toward the open fields beyond the town. The noise faded behind them. The wind brushed against tall grass, and the land stretched wide and quiet. After a long walk, Tom stopped near an old fence. He turned to Mira and handed her the paper contract. She looked at it with suspicion. Tom tore the paper in half, then he tore it again. He dropped the pieces onto the dirt and stepped back. "You are free," he said. Myra stared at him, stunned. Her anger faltered, replaced by confusion. No one had ever paid money to release her before. "Why?" she asked. Tom looked toward the horizon. He spoke slowly, choosing his words with care. "I have seen too many wrong things," he said. "I could not walk away from this." Myra studied his face. She searched for lies and found none. Still, trust did not come easily. She picked up one piece of the torn paper, then let it fall again. "You paid for something you did not want," she said. "I paid to end it," Tom replied. Mira turned toward the path leading back to her village. She paused only once. "My name is Myra," she said. "Tom," he answered. She nodded and walked away, her back straight and her steps steady. Tom watched until she disappeared into the distance. The land was quiet again, but something had changed. For both of them, the moment at the auction was not the end. It was the beginning of a story that neither yet understood. The path back to the village felt longer than usual. Mira walked alone, her thoughts heavy but her steps strong. The wind moved through the tall grass, brushing against her clothes like a reminder that she was free. Still, freedom felt strange. It was not something she trusted easily. When she reached the village, people gathered around her. Elders, workers, and families listened as she told them what had happened at the auction. Some were shocked, some were cautious. A few warned her that kindness from strangers often carried a hidden cost. Myra listened to every word. She respected their fear because she had lived it too. Yet something inside her told her that Tom was different. He had not demanded thanks. He had not followed her. He had simply let her go. That night, Mira could not sleep. She sat by the fire and stared into the flames. Her anger from the auction still burned, but it was changing shape. It was turning into questions. Far from the village, Tom rode back to his small ranch near the river. The sky darkened, and stars appeared one by one. He tied his horse and sat on the wooden steps of his cabin. The place was quiet, but his mind was not. He kept thinking about Myra's eyes at the auction. They were not eyes of defeat. They were eyes that challenged the world. He wondered if he had done the right thing. He believed he had, but doubt followed him like a shadow. The next day, Tom went into town for supplies. Whispers followed him. Some people looked at him with curiosity. Others avoided him. The land officer watched him closely from across the street, his face tight with anger. Tom ignored the looks. He bought what he needed and left quickly. He knew trouble often grew when people with power felt challenged. Back at the village, Myra worked alongside her people. She helped gather food and repair shelters. Life continued, but something had shifted. The unfair contracts still existed, and many families still suffered under them. Myra could not forget that. One afternoon, a child ran to Myra with news. A messenger from town had arrived, warning that the land officer planned to return. He wanted to question Myra and the cowboy who paid for her contract. Fear spread through the village. Some urged Myra to hide. Others said it was time to stand firm. Myra listened, then made her choice. "I will speak," she said. "Running will only strengthen him." The next morning, Myra walked toward the river alone. She had decided to see Tom again, not as someone bound by law, but as a woman seeking truth. Tom was fixing a fence when he saw her approaching. He stopped and rested his hands on the wood. He did not move closer. He waited. "I came because I needed answers," Myra said. Tom nodded. He invited her to sit near the fire outside his cabin. He brought water and food, placing them within reach but keeping his distance. His actions were careful and respectful. They spoke for a long time. Myra asked why he had chosen to act when others stayed silent. Tom told her about his past, about roads he regretted, and moments when he had failed to help. He said he could not change everything, but he could change one moment. Myra listened closely. She watched his hands, his posture, his eyes. She saw honesty. She still did not fully trust him, but respect began to grow as the sun lowered. Tom spoke about the land officer and the system that trapped people in endless debt. Myra realized their struggles were connected, even though they came from different worlds. "You did not buy me," Myra said firmly. "You ended something wrong." Tom nodded. "That is all I wanted." News traveled quickly. When the land officer arrived at the ranch later that week, he did not come alone. He brought papers and threats. He claimed laws were broken and demanded payment. Myra stepped forward before Tom could speak. She faced the officer without fear. "These contracts are lies," she said. "They are built on confusion and silence." The officer laughed, but people had gathered. Town workers, farmers, and travelers listened. Some recognized the truth in her words. Others spoke up about their own debts and losses. The officer's confidence faltered. Power weakened when people spoke together. By the end of the day, the officer left in anger, promising consequences. Yet the crowd did not scatter. They stayed, talking, sharing, and questioning. That night, Myra stood by the river, watching the water move steadily forward. She realized her anger had changed again. It was no longer only personal. It had become a reason to act. Tom stood nearby, looking at the same water. Neither spoke for a long moment. "The auction was not the end," Myra said quietly. "No," Tom replied. "It was the beginning." The river flowed on, carrying their words forward, toward changes neither of them could fully see yet. The morning sun rose slowly over the river. Light touched the water and turned it bright. Myra stood near the bank, watching the current move forward without fear or doubt. The events of the past days stayed in her mind. She knew change had started, but change always demanded effort. Tom worked quietly near the ranch. He repaired tools and cleaned the stable. He did not speak much, but his thoughts were heavy. He knew the land officer would not stay silent for long. Power did not like to be questioned. Word spread across nearby towns about the gathering at the river. People spoke of a native woman who stood strong and a cowboy who refused to profit from injustice. Some stories grew larger with every telling, but the truth remained clear. One afternoon, Myra returned to her village and called a meeting. Elders, workers, and families gathered in a wide circle. She spoke clearly and without anger. "The contracts control us because we stand alone," she said. "If we speak together, they lose their hold." Some nodded in agreement. Others feared punishment. Myra did not force anyone. She asked them to think, to remember how silence had only deepened their hardship. That same evening, Tom rode into town to sell grain. He noticed changes. People greeted him with respect. Some asked questions. Others shared their own troubles with unfair debts and lost land. Tom listened more than he spoke. He told them what Myra had said by the river. He told them that truth became strong when shared. The land officer watched from his office window. His jaw tightened as he saw people talking in groups. He sent letters to higher officials, demanding support. He planned to regain control. A week later, notices appeared across town. A public meeting was announced. All contract holders were ordered to attend. The officer claimed it was for clarity, but many sensed a threat. Fear returned like a cold wind. Some wanted to stay home, others felt anger rise. Myra knew this meeting would matter. On the day of the meeting, people gathered in the town square. The officer stood on the platform again, the same place where the auction had happened. He spoke loudly, reminding everyone of rules and consequences. Myra stood near the front. Tom stood beside her, silent but steady. When the officer finished, Myra stepped forward. She spoke without shouting. She explained how debts were created without understanding. She spoke of families forced into labor for years with no end in sight. Her words were clear and calm. Murmurs spread through the crowd. People recognized their own stories in hers. One by one, others spoke: a farmer, a worker, a trader. Each voice added weight. The officer tried to interrupt, but the crowd did not quiet. Authority weakened when faced with shared truth. Higher officials arrived later that day. They listened to the complaints and examined the contracts. They saw missing records and false calculations. The officer's power began to crumble. That evening, the officer was removed from his position. The news traveled fast. Relief and disbelief mixed together. Myra returned to the river with Tom. The air felt lighter. The land seemed to breathe. "This is not finished," Tom said. "I know," Myra replied, "but it is real." In the following weeks, fair agreements replaced the old ones. People worked with clear terms and honest pay. The town slowly healed. Myra became a voice people trusted. She did not seek power, she sought balance. Tom supported her work but stayed in the background. One evening they sat by the fire near the ranch. The sky was full of stars. "You changed more than one moment," Myra said. Tom shook his head. "We did it together." The river continued to flow, carrying the story forward, shaping a future built on choice and respect. Change did not arrive all at once. It moved slowly, like the river after heavy rain. The land felt calmer, but many old habits remained. Some people accepted the new agreements with hope. Others doubted that fairness would last. Myra understood this doubt. She knew that fear lived deep in people who had been controlled for a long time. She chose patience. Each day she walked between the village and the town, listening more than speaking. Tom continued his work at the ranch. He repaired fences for neighbors and helped move supplies. He avoided attention, but people noticed him anyway. They saw his steady actions and his quiet respect. One morning, a group of traders arrived from a distant area. They brought news that similar contracts still existed beyond the river. Families there faced the same unfair rules that had once trapped Myra's people. The news spread quickly. Some felt relief that their own burden had lifted. Others felt responsibility. Myra felt both. She gathered the elders and workers again. She spoke clearly. "We cannot turn away," she said. "What changed here can change there." Not everyone agreed. Some feared that helping others would bring trouble back to their door. Myra did not argue. She asked for volunteers, not followers. Tom listened from the edge of the gathering. He stepped forward and offered his help. He said he knew the roads and the people beyond the river. A few others joined him. The journey began at dawn. Myra, Tom, and a small group traveled across open land. The road was long and dry. At night, they shared food and stories by the fire. Trust grew in quiet moments. When they reached the distant settlements, they saw familiar signs of hardship. People worked without clear terms. Fear followed every conversation. Many believed nothing could change. Myra spoke to them as she had spoken before. She shared her own story, not as a tale of rescue, but as a lesson in unity. Tom spoke of standing firm without force. Some listened, some turned away. Myra expected this. Change needed time. Trouble came when local enforcers heard about the meetings. They arrived with harsh words and warnings. Tension filled the air. Myra stood her ground. She spoke calmly and asked questions that exposed the weakness in their claims. Tom stood beside her, silent but present. Others stepped forward too. The enforcers left without action. Their authority felt less certain. Over weeks, more people joined the discussions. Records were reviewed. Honest agreements replaced the old ones. Progress was slow, but it was real. When Myra and Tom returned home, they were tired but hopeful. The town welcomed them with quiet smiles rather than celebration. People understood that true change did not need noise. Yet not everyone was pleased. Former allies of the removed officer watched closely. They whispered and planned, hoping to regain influence. One evening, Tom found a warning carved into his fence. It carried no name, but the message was clear. Someone wanted fear to return. Tom removed the damaged wood and replaced it without comment. He told Myra what happened. She did not look surprised. "Fear speaks when it is losing," she said. They increased their efforts. Clear records were kept. Meetings stayed open. Nothing was hidden. The pressure slowly faded. Without secrecy, those who relied on it lost strength. As seasons changed, the land settled into a new rhythm. Work felt fair. Voices felt heard. Myra stood by the river again, watching the water move forward. Tom joined her. "This work never truly ends," he said. "No," she replied, "but now it belongs to everyone." The river flowed on, steady and sure, carrying the weight of many voices toward a stronger future. The final season of the year arrived with cool winds and clear skies. The land looked different now. Fields were worked with care, and people walked with less fear in their steps. The long shadow of unfair control had faded. Though memories of it still remained, Myra continued to move between the village and the town. She was no longer seen only as a native woman who had stood at an auction. She was known as someone who listened, someone who spoke with honesty, and someone who did not turn away when things became difficult. She did not claim any title. She refused special treatment. When people asked her to lead, she reminded them that change worked best when shared. Her strength came from unity, not command. Tom stayed near the river for a while longer than he had planned. The open trail still called to him, but he felt that his work here was not yet complete. He helped teach fair record-keeping and showed others how to protect agreements with clear words. One evening, a large meeting was held near the old auction yard. The platform still stood, but it carried no power anymore. People gathered to mark the end of the unfair contract system. There was no celebration filled with noise. Instead, there was calm and reflection. Myra spoke briefly. She reminded everyone of the silence that once ruled the yard. She reminded them how easily injustice could return if voices grew quiet again. This place once took freedom, she said. Now it must protect it. People nodded in agreement. They understood the weight of her words. After the meeting, Myra walked alone through the yard. She remembered the moment when she had spoken in anger. She did not regret the words, but she understood them better now. Defiance had opened a door, but cooperation had carried them through it. Tom waited near the fence. He knew this place held meaning for her. "You changed this ground," he said. Myra shook her head. "We changed it." Soon after, Tom prepared to leave. The trail waited, and new roads called him forward. On his last morning by the river, Myra came to see him. They stood quietly for a moment. The water moved steadily, just as it always had. "You once paid $2, Myra said. "Not to own, but to end a wrong." Tom nodded. It was never about money. Myra reached into her pouch and handed him a small woven band. It was simple, made by her people. "For the road," she said. Tom accepted it with respect. "For the memory," he replied. They parted without heavy words. Tom rode toward the horizon, carrying less weight than he had in years. Myra watched until he was gone, then turned back toward her people. Life continued. Children grew up hearing stories of the auction, not as a tale of fear, but as a lesson of courage. The town and village worked side by side. Disagreements still happened, but they were faced openly. Myra spent her days teaching and learning. She helped record histories so they would not be forgotten. She believed memory was a shield against repeating old harm. Sometimes she walked to the river alone. She would sit and listen to the water. It reminded her that movement mattered, even when it was slow. Years later, travelers still spoke of the place where an unfair system fell without violence. They spoke of a woman who refused obedience and a cowboy who chose conscience. The land did not belong to one person. It belonged to those who protected it with fairness. The river kept flowing, carrying the story forward, steady and strong, into a future shaped by choice, respect, and shared strength.